Imagine standing at the altar, your heart racing, the man you love waiting for you, only to have your future ripped apart in front of everyone you know. What was supposed to be the happiest day of my life turned into a nightmare. A wedding scandal so brutal it went viral and destroyed more than just a marriage. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today's story is about love, betrayal, family pride, and a wedding disaster you won't believe. If you've ever doubted whether someone truly has your back, this one will hit hard. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. It helps us share more stories like this, and maybe even yours one day. Atlanta hums in its glass towers. But at the city's edge, the streets lower their voice. That hush is where I grew up, in a one-story ranch with a crooked mailbox and a porch that held summer like a secret. The air inside smelled like pancakes, detergent, and the faint shadow of motor oil from my dad's work shirts. We were not rich, but routine made our home feel steady. A porch light that always worked, birthdays circled on a calendar, fridge magnets that never quite held every note. I was 8 when the quiet lost its balance. Illness arrived the way winter does in Georgia. Rumored, then sudden. My mother's hair thinned, her laughter softened, and the hospital gathered every hour into a hard white knot. One morning, I woke to a world that had misplaced her voice. I remember that voice more than words. It sounded like the soft bell of ice in tea glasses, and the small clap of a porch swing chain. She read to me and made the funny parts bigger, widening her eyes until mine widened back. Now the memories are sun-bleached at the edges. I hold them carefully, because if I grip too tight, they smear. What stays is the feeling. Her palm on my hair, the citrus lotion she liked, the warm certainty that stories end well when she is there to finish them. Grief taught me how fragile certainty is, and how it moves at its own pace. My dad answered with steadiness. He owned a small logistics company that hauled freight across the Southeast, just enough trucks to keep the lights on and the worry awake. He left before dawn to meet drivers and returned after sunset with ink on his fingers. Even tired, he flipped pancakes that tasted like weekend on school mornings. He listened with his whole face, the way people do when they know time can be stolen. He was not perfect, but he was present, and presence is its own miracle. People think strength is volume. My dad taught me strength is maintenance. It is tightening a hinge before it squeals, paying the electric bill on time, admitting you're afraid and choosing anyway. Sometimes I found him at the kitchen table, hands around a mug gone cold, looking at nothing. He did not ask me to pretend we were fine. He kept choosing us until choosing us felt like breathing. When you lose early, you learn to travel light. I collected control instead of crushes. While other girls practiced signatures with someone else's last name, I memorized bus routes, color-coded planner pages, and counted tips from a coffee shop into a shoebox labeled someday. My heart felt like a door with 3 locks and no peephole. Love from across the street looked beautiful and unsafe. A house admired from the sidewalk but never entered, because the mortgage might own you. School rewarded order. Books made sense, and so did deadlines. In college, I stumbled into marketing and felt as if I had discovered a map of how desire travels. Find the story, polish the promise, ship the feeling people want to hold. Spreadsheets offered mercy. If you did the work, the numbers told the truth. After graduation, I moved into a small apartment over a brick alley and an overachieving crepe myrtle. I taped project calendars to my fridge and lined clean sneakers by the door like a row of intentions. Grief, though, is a patient landlord, and some nights it knocked. I kept a shoebox of photographs on the closet's top shelf and visited when the weather inside me turned. In one picture, my mother cups my cheek like she is studying light. In another, she and my dad lean against the hood of his first truck, sunburned and proud. The pictures worked like matches. A brief flare, warmth, then smoke. I worried the flame would fail if I stopped striking it, so I kept striking. Dad did not speak in paragraphs. He favored honest sentences. "She loved you big," he would say, sliding a plate of eggs closer. "She would be furious if you shrank your life to keep from losing again." He never pushed me toward dating.
He insisted on small, reliable joys. A yard sale, a radio sing-along, a peach pie because Georgia should taste like something. I practiced those little joys the way you practice scales, not because an audience is waiting, but so your hands remember.
By 29, I had the sort of schedule that impresses strangers and worries friends. I was a marketing coordinator who answered emails under streetlights and in the pharmacy line. I knew which corner store brewed decent midnight coffee and which streets turned to rivers after storms. My team trusted me with big campaigns because I trusted myself to outrun doubt. The confidence was real, but it came with conditions. It lived safely in spreadsheets, not in the tender room where love asks you to risk your breath. On sticky evenings, I sat on my balcony and traced the skyline with my eyes, naming buildings the way you name constellations. Downtown glittered, and beyond the glitter, the suburbs kept their secrets in cul-de-sacs and closets. I belonged to both and neither. I understood the city's appetite and the outskirts' patience. That double citizenship felt like a skill until the night it began to feel like a fault line. If you had asked me then what I wanted, I would have said stability. A dog, maybe. A corner office someday. Enough money to take my dad on a vacation that did not involve roadside diners or truck stop coffee. I would have said I was fine. Truly. Capital F, fine. That was the truth I knew how to share. The truer truth lived under my ribs. I wanted to be chosen without audition. I wanted to set down the old burden of proving I was worth staying for. I believed safety could be built from work alone, but life is unruly. It prefers stories with conflict and people who must decide whether the soft animal of their heart is still allowed to run. Mine had grown quiet from being kept indoors. I was careful, proud of my caution, armored by it. Then, on a muggy afternoon when thunder had stacked over Midtown like promises, a door I did not plan for opened, and my careful life took a breath. Before the city set the stage for everything that followed, before festival lights and proposals, before a chandeliered venue and a night that should have been a beginning, there was simply this: a daughter and a father walking the aisles of grief until the rhythm felt like home. If the world is a map, our house is a thumbprint on its edge, and still we found north. I did not know how hard that compass would be tested. I only knew it existed, and that it pointed through the dark. Love was coming. I mistook the tremor for ordinary summer thunder. I would learn the difference soon enough, but that is another chapter. Atlanta summers do not whisper. They cling. The heat sits on your shoulders, presses into your skin, and refuses to let go. On one such afternoon, when the air felt heavy enough to swallow whole, my coworker dragged me to a networking mixer downtown. I had every excuse ready. Deadlines, fatigue, even the laundry waiting back at my apartment. But she insisted, "Come on, Jenna, you work too much. Just one drink. Who knows, maybe you'll meet someone." Meeting someone was the last thing on my list. My heart was a locked door, and I had no intention of finding a key. But that night, in the dim glow of a bar lit more for mood than clarity, I met Micah. He didn't arrive with fanfare or clever lines. He just appeared, tall, clean-cut, with a smile that managed to be disarming without being smug. I noticed his eyes first, sharp enough to study you, soft enough to keep you from feeling like prey. When he spoke, it wasn't about himself. He asked about me, my work, my favorite spots in the city, whether I was more coffee shop introvert or rooftop patio extrovert. It was strange. Unsettling even. Most men had a script. His felt like curiosity. At first, I brushed him off. I'd perfected the polite laugh, the thanks but no thanks tone. But he didn't fade away. He texted me to check in on stressful days. He left coffee at my desk when I was swamped with campaign deadlines. He didn't push. He stayed. Steady, patient, present. Weeks turned into months, and my fortress began to crack. Saying no became harder when saying yes promised burgers at the Varsity, long walks through Piedmont Park, and balcony conversations that stretched until dawn. I hadn't realized how long it had been since I'd laughed, really laughed, until Micah showed up with jokes about terrible drivers on the connector or confessed his guilty obsession with peach milkshakes. Slowly, carefully, I let myself feel something.
Love didn't rush me. It seeped in, drop by drop, until one day I realized my walls weren't protecting me anymore. They were just keeping me from living. Micah was a software developer, his world built from codes and algorithms. Where my career chased ideas and campaigns, his chased solutions and systems. On paper, we were opposites. In reality, we were balance. His calm steadied my storms. My passion lit fires under his routine. For the first time since I was 8, I dared to imagine forever. One evening, under the twinkling lights of Centennial Olympic Park, Forever asked me a question. He knelt, not perfectly smooth, not cinematic, but awkward and real, his hands shaking as he fungled with the ring box. "Jenna," he said, his voice low but firm, "I want to build a life with you. I'll always have your back." My heart thundered. A part of me trembled with old fear, the kind that comes from losing love once and never wanting to risk it again. But looking into his eyes, steady as always, I felt something shift. I said yes. My dad cried when I told him. He'd cried before, at my college graduation, at the memory of Mom's favorite song playing on the radio, but this was different. This was joy breaking through the weight of years. "Jenna, you're really doing this," he whispered, pulling me into a hug. "I always knew you'd find your way." For a moment, it felt like the world was healing, like I had found both love and approval, two things I'd always feared were out of reach. But every story has shadows waiting just beyond the light. Micah wasn't just a man, he was part of a family, and his family wasn't like mine. While I came from a modest ranch house where pancakes meant love and late nights meant sacrifice, he came from Buckhead, Atlanta's glittering pocket of old money and quiet arrogance. His parents, Oakley and Victor Caldwell, were names spoken with a mix of envy and distaste at charity events. Big house, bigger egos, legacy carved into the city's social fabric. Micah downplayed it at first. He told me stories of his mom's sharp tongue, his dad's obsession with appearances, his sister, Reagan's, ruthless climb in the legal world. I thought he was exaggerating, painting them in the worst light so I'd be pleasantly surprised when I met them. He swore they'd love me. "You're amazing, Jenna. They'll see it."
But a knot of unease tightened in my stomach every time he spoke of them. Could a girl raised by a single dad, scraping by in the suburbs, ever fit into their pristine world? I wanted to believe love was enough. Micah's steadiness made me think it could be. Wedding planning consumed us. Days blurred into flower arrangements, venue scouting, and late-night work emails that bled into arguments over guest lists. Stress wrapped itself around us. But each time I faltered, Micah squeezed my hand. "We're in this together, Jenna, you and me." His words grounded me. Still, the knot never left. Weeks turned into deadlines. Deadlines turned into weekends stolen by cake tastings and dress fittings. But through it all, one fact loomed. I hadn't met his parents yet. Every time, there was an excuse. Scheduling conflicts, travel, business dinners. Part of me was relieved. Another part dreaded the inevitable. The day finally came when Micah insisted it was time. "They'll love you," he promised, his hand warm against mine as we drove past manicured lawns and gated driveways. Their house loomed at the end of a winding road, all white columns and sprawling porches, the kind of place that screamed wealth louder than any introduction could. I smoothed my dress, clutching the bottle of wine I'd brought as a gift, and told myself it would be fine. Love, after all, was supposed to bridge divides. But as Oakley Caldwell opened the door, pearls gleaming, smile tight, eyes sharp as a hawk, I realized this was not just a meeting, it was an evaluation. And in their world, I wasn't sure the girl from a modest ranch house ever stood a chance.
The Caldwell home felt like a museum, not a house. High ceilings, polished wood floors that reflected light like glass, walls lined with art I couldn't name. My heels clicked too loudly against the marble entryway as I followed Micah inside, clutching the bottle of wine like it was a shield. "Micah, darling, Oakley cooed, pulling her son into a hug. Her voice was syrupy, but her eyes were knives. Then she turned to me. That smile didn't reach her eyes, and I felt her gaze sweep me from head to toe, appraising, calculating. "You must be Jenna," she said finally, her tone cool. "Yes, ma'am," I managed, forcing a grin. I held out the wine. "Thank you for having me." She took it without glancing at the label, set it aside, and ushered us into the living room. My stomach knotted. Victor Caldwell barely looked up from his phone, muttered a hello, and sank back into scrolling. His presence was like a shadow, heavy, dismissive, a man too important to waste time on introductions. Oakley perched on the sofa like a queen on her throne. "So, Jenna," she began, her posture stiff, her eyes narrowing. "Tell me about yourself. Micah is our only son, our pride and joy. We need to know you're suitable." That word landed like a punch. Suitable, not welcome. Not family, suitable. I straightened my shoulders, swallowing the lump in my throat. "I work in marketing," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I grew up here in Atlanta, raised by my dad. I'm really excited to be joining your family."
Her lips pursed, unimpressed. "Raised by your father alone?" she asked, her voice dripping with something I couldn't quite place. Pity, disdain, or both? "No mother to guide you? That must have been challenging." My chest tightened. I wanted to defend him, to tell her he'd been everything, both parents in one, the rock that held me together. But I bit my tongue. "My dad did a great job," I said instead. "I'm grateful for him." Before Oakley could reply, Victor finally looked up, his glasses sliding down his nose. "Marrying into our family is not a simple affair, Jenna. Micah is our legacy. You'll be expected to uphold that. Can you handle that responsibility?" His tone made it sound less like a marriage and more like a business merger. I blinked, stunned. "I love Micah," I said, my voice firm. "We'll support each other. Build a life together." Oakley let out a sharp little laugh. "Support each other? Oh, honey, a wife's job is to elevate her husband. Don't drag him down with your independence." Her words stung. I felt my pulse pounding in my ears. But before I could respond, another figure entered the room. Regan Caldwell, Micah's older sister, swept in with sleek hair, sharp heels, and a tailored blazer that screamed courtroom dominance. She glanced at me with a smirk. "So, you're the one, the girl from a single-parent home. I suppose you know what it means to join a family like ours." My jaw clenched. "There's nothing wrong with my upbringing," I said, my voice trembling but clear. "My dad worked hard, and I'm proud of where I come from." Regan exchanged a look with her mother. "Optics matter. Single-parent backgrounds don't exactly scream stability. We're protective of Micah's future." Victor nodded in agreement. "If you want to be serious about this marriage, you'll need to prove yourself worthy. That means putting our family first." The walls seemed to close in, their words piled up like bricks, boxing me in. And through it all, Micah just sat there, silent. His hand squeezed mine under the table, a quiet reassurance, but not once did he open his mouth to defend me. I felt smaller with every passing second, like I was shrinking into the couch while their judgments echoed in my head. "Raised by your father alone. Not suitable. Prove you're worthy." It was a trial, not a dinner. When the evening finally ended, I plastered on a smile, thanked them for their hospitality, and walked out with my head held high, even though my insides churned with shame and fury. The drive back to my apartment was silent. The streetlights blurred through the car window as tears threatened. "They didn't mean it like that," Micah said softly, breaking the silence at last. "They're just particular. They want the best for us." I turned to him, my voice shaking. "Micah, they insulted my dad. They insulted me, and you didn't say a word." His hand tightened on the wheel. "They're my parents," he muttered. "They'll come around. Let's just focus on the wedding." But his words didn't soothe me. They burned. That night, lying awake in my apartment, I stared at the ceiling while doubt gnawed at me. I had spent years guarding my heart from hurt, years building a life of control and caution. And now, sitting in the glow of city lights, I realized something terrifying. Micah's silence had hurt me more than his parents' cruelty. Because silence, I knew too well, is the loudest betrayal. Silence has a way of stretching itself, wrapping around you like an unwelcome blanket until you can't breathe. After that night in Buckhead, silence became the third presence in every conversation Micah and I shared. At first, I tried to ignore it. Wedding planning left little space for reflection anyway. Guest lists, floral arrangements, deposit deadlines, all of it demanded my attention. But no matter how many tasks I checked off, that silence clung to me. It whispered reminders of Oakley's tight smile, Victor's cool disdain, Reagan's sharp words, and above all, Micah's refusal to defend me. One evening, after another long day at the office, I found myself staring at the city lights outside my apartment window. Atlanta glowed like it always did, bright, restless, alive. But inside, I felt hollow. My hands twisted the hem of my shirt as I rehearsed words I wasn't sure I had the courage to say. When Micah arrived, carrying takeout like a peace offering, I decided I couldn't keep quiet. We sat on the couch. Cartons of pad thai opened between us, the skyline a flickering backdrop through the glass. "Micah," I began, my voice quieter than I meant it to be. "We need to talk about your parents." He froze, chopsticks halfway to his mouth. His face softened into a sigh. "Jenna." "No!" My voice came sharper this time. My chest tightened, but I forced the words out. "They insulted my dad. They insulted me, and you sat there. You didn't say anything." He set the carton down, rubbing his neck like the weight of my words pressed on him physically. "I didn't want to make it worse. They're intense, but they mean well. Once we're married, they'll see how great you are." I stared at him, searching his eyes for something more, anger on my behalf, outrage, even a flicker of defense. But what I saw instead was resignation. He believed his parents' cruelty was just something to endure, like traffic or bad weather. "Protective?" I repeated, my voice trembling. "Micah, that wasn't protective. That was cruel. They made me feel small, like I'll never be good enough, and you just let them." His hand reached for mine. Warm, but not reassuring. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "I just thought if I stayed quiet, it would pass. I didn't want to escalate it." Tears stung my eyes. "Do you understand what that silence felt like? I need you to have my back. If they talk to me like that again, will you say something?" He hesitated. The pause stretched, sharp as a blade. Then he nodded. "Yeah, of course. Let's just get through the wedding. It'll be fine." Fine. That word sliced through me. Fine was not enough. Fine was not what I wanted to build a life on. I thought about my dad, the man who never once let me feel abandoned, who carried the weight of two parents without complaint. He'd fought for me every day. Was it too much to expect Micah to fight for me too? The weeks that followed blurred in a haze of checklists and compromises. We booked a midtown venue, all chandeliers and hardwood floors, the kind of place that would impress the Caldwells' friends. I chose a dress, a swirl of lace that made me feel like someone I almost recognized. We debated menus, settled on a peach-themed dessert table, a nod to Georgia pride that made my dad smile. But the joy felt fragile. I'd catch myself staring at my engagement ring, wondering if it glittered too brightly for something built on such shaky ground. Micah was still sweet, still the man who brought me coffee on tough mornings and danced with me in the kitchen when I was too tired to stand. But he was also the man who dodged every conversation about his parents, who changed the subject whenever I brought up Buckhead. It was as if he wanted to erase that night from memory, to pretend the insults never landed. One evening, as we stuffed save-the-date envelopes, I tried again. The table was covered in cardstock and glue sticks, but my words cut through the clutter. "Do your parents always judge people like that?" I asked carefully. "They barely know me, but it felt like they decided I wasn't good enough the second I walked in." Micah sighed, setting down a stack of cards. "They're just old school, Jenna. They care about appearances. Once they get to know you, it'll change." Appearances. The word tasted bitter. "So this is about where I come from? About my dad raising me alone?" He looked away, jaw tight. "It's not like that. They just want what's best for us." "What's best for us?" I echoed, my voice breaking. "Or what's best for them?" His silence was answer enough. I stared at him across the table. envelopes blurring in my vision. For the first time, I wondered if love was enough, if forever could survive a family determined to tear it down, and a partner too afraid to stop them. That night, lying awake, I thought about my dad, about the nights he sat alone at the kitchen table, weary but unyielding, about the way he'd faced the world, not for applause but for me. I thought about how fiercely he protected me, how his love never wavered. Micah's love was different. Softer, sweeter, but was it strong enough to withstand his parents? Strong enough to defend me when it mattered? The wedding loomed closer with every sunrise, and so did the truth I was too afraid to name. Maybe the real test of love wasn't how it began. Maybe it was whether it stood tall when the storm came. And deep down, I feared Micah wasn't ready for the storm his family had already unleashed. The closer the wedding came, the heavier everything felt. The Midtown venue had been booked, deposits paid, invitations printed. The chandeliers gleamed in photographs, the polished floors reflected promise. But for me, they reflected doubt. Every time I looked at the peach blossom centerpieces my dad and I picked out together, I wondered if I was building a future or a trap. Micah stayed sweet, steady, present in the small ways. He still brought me coffee when I worked late, still texted me silly memes that made me laugh in the middle of meetings. He was the same man who'd knelt under twinkling park lights and asked me to be his forever. But there was a shadow now, one shaped like Oakley, Victor, and Reagan, and the silence he'd given them instead of me. I told myself I could live with it, that love meant compromise, even if the compromise cost me a piece of myself. But every time I thought of my dad, that certainty cracked. He had carried me through the darkest loss, fought for me when I was too small to fight for myself. He had been my proof that love was more than words. How could I settle for a man who couldn't stand up in a single room at a single table when it mattered most? The tension was a quiet hum beneath every conversation Micah and I had. We debated over guest seating, argued about music playlists, but the real argument, the one about loyalty, about courage, stayed buried, smoldering. One night after a particularly long day at work, I sat across from him with wedding binders sprawled across the coffee table. The skyline flickered beyond the window, but my eyes were fixed on him. "Micah," I said carefully, "I need to know something. If your parents talk to me like that again, if they belittle my dad or me, will you stand up for me?" He looked at me for a long time. His face softened, but his answer came slow, hesitant. "Of course," he said finally. "I'll handle it." But something in his tone, the pause, the way his eyes slid away from mine, told me otherwise. It sounded less like a promise and more like a deflection. After he left that night, I sat on my balcony, the humid Atlanta air pressing against my skin, and thought about escape. Not escape from Micah, not yet, but escape from walking blindly into a future where my worth would always be tested, where silence would be my shield instead of his voice. I didn't want to call off the wedding, not when the deposits were paid, not when my dad was so proud, not when friends and family had RSVP'd with excitement, but I knew I needed a plan. I started small. I made sure the savings account I'd built over the years remained in my name only. I tucked away a portion of each paycheck, more than I usually would, just in case. I reviewed the lease on my apartment, noting the terms, the dates, the quiet exit strategies people don't think about until they need them. It wasn't that I planned to leave Micah, it was that I needed to know I could if silence became my new normal. And somewhere inside, the truth I didn't want to admit pulsed louder. I was preparing for the storm. The following weekend, my dad and I spent the day finalizing details with the caterer. He looked so happy, laughing as he taste tested peach cobbler samples, reminiscing about how Mom used to make hers with too much cinnamon. His eyes crinkled at the corners when he looked at me, and I thought, he's waited his whole life to see me happy. He looked at me for a long time. His face softened, but his answer came slow, hesitant. "Of course," he said finally. "I'll handle it." But something in his tone, the pause, the way his eyes slid away from mine, told me otherwise. It sounded less like a promise and more like a deflection. After he left that night, I sat on my balcony, the humid Atlanta air pressing against my skin, and thought about escape. Not escape from Micah, Not yet, but escape from walking blindly into a future where my worth would always be tested, where silence would be my shield instead of his voice. I didn't want to call off the wedding, not when the deposits were paid, not when my dad was so proud, not when friends and family had RSVP'd with excitement, but I knew I needed a plan. I started small. I made sure the savings account I'd built over the years remained in my name only. I tucked away a portion of each paycheck, more than I usually would, just in case. I reviewed the lease on my apartment, noting the terms, the dates, the quiet exit strategies people don't think about until they need them. It wasn't that I planned to leave Micah, it was that I needed to know I could if silence became my new normal. And somewhere inside, the truth I didn't want to admit pulsed louder. I was preparing for the storm. The following weekend, my dad and I spent the day finalizing details with the caterer. He looked so happy, laughing as he taste tested peach cobbler samples, reminiscing about how mom used to make hers with too much cinnamon. His eyes crinkled at the corners when he looked at me, and I thought, he's waited his whole life to see me happy. The morning of my wedding began like a dream that didn't quite belong to me. The midtown venue glowed in soft light, chandeliers glistening overhead, tables draped in white linen, peach blossoms perched in crystal vases. Guests fluttered in, laughter rising, camera flashes blinking like tiny stars. The air buzzed with excitement, a hum of celebration that should have filled me with joy. Instead, I stood before the mirror in the bridal suite, staring at the woman in white staring back. The dress fit perfectly, lace trailing down like a river, veil pinned in place, but it felt like armor, heavy and suffocating. "You look beautiful," my dad whispered, his voice thick as he adjusted my veil. His eyes were misty, proud. "Your mom would be so proud." The lump in my throat swelled. I hugged him tightly, clinging to his steadiness, to the one man who had never let me down. His hand on my shoulder steadied me as we stepped into the hallway, the music swelling, guests rising to their feet. The aisle stretched before me, lined of flowers and faces. Friends, co-workers, relatives, all smiling, waiting. At the end stood Micah. Nervous smile plastered across his face, his hands twitching at his sides. For a moment, I let myself believe in the fairy tale. My dad's arm guided me forward, each step both a promise and a question. When we reached the altar, Micah's eyes met mine, and for the briefest flicker of a second, I saw the man I fell in love with. The man who brought me coffee, who danced with me in kitchens. We exchanged vows. His voice was steady, mine trembled but did not break. Rings slipped onto fingers, promises made in front of witnesses. When the officiant declared us husband and wife, the crowd erupted into applause. Cameras flashed. For a heartbeat, it felt perfect. But perfection is fragile, and in my story, it never lasted long. The reception unfolded with music and laughter. My college friends toasted me, coworkers clinked glasses, the peach dessert table drew compliments. For a while, I let myself breathe, let myself smile, even dance. Maybe, just maybe, Micah was right. Maybe his parents would soften. Maybe love could smooth the jagged edges. Then I saw them, Oakley and Victor, near the bar, drinks in hand, their faces flushed, eyes sharp with the cruel glint of intoxication. Reagan hovered nearby, sleek as always, her smirk carved into place. A chill slid down my spine. When it came time for speeches, the MC handed me the microphone. My heart raced, but I steadied my voice, ready to thank our guests, to honor my dad, to speak love into the room. But Oakley stepped forward, snatching the microphone from my hand with a wobbling grin. "Listen up, everyone," she announced, her voice loud, slurred but commanding. Laughter hushed into silence. Every eye turned toward us. "You're part of our family now, Jenna, so you'd better step up. We expect you to hand over your salary, all $18,500 a month, straight to us. Prove you're not just some gold digger." Gasps rippled through the room. Murmurs followed. My face burned as I stood frozen, bouquet trembling in my hands. Guests exchanged shocked glances, some giggling nervously, unsure if it was a joke. I turned to Micah, my eyes pleading. "Say something. Stop her.
defend me. But he just stood there, pale, silent, his lips pressed tight, his hands shoved into his pockets. Before I could move, Victor grabbed the microphone, his voice louder, mocking. "That dress doesn't suit you, Jenna. You should have asked us first. A wife should look appropriate for her husband's legacy." Laughter, cruel and sharp, rippled across the hall. Oakley nodded, eagerly, smirking. "Tell her, Victor, she needs to know her place." The humiliation pressed down on me like a weight I couldn't lift. I felt stripped bare in front of everyone I loved. The girl from a single-parent home on trial before Buckhead royalty. And Micah, my husband, my supposed partner, just stood there. The silence between us screamed louder than their insults. Then my dad stepped forward. His face calm, but his eyes blazed like fire. Gently, firmly, he took the microphone from Victor's hand. "That's enough," he said, his voice steady, cutting through the whispers. "You're embarrassing yourselves and humiliating my daughter. Have you no shame?" Oakley staggered, glaring. "Who are you to talk? A single father with no class, raising a girl who doesn't belong in our world?" The crowd gasped. My chest clenched, rage flooding my veins. I wanted to scream, to tell them my dad was worth 10 of them combined. But before I could, he spoke again, his tone low and dangerous. "You think single parents are beneath you?" he asked coldly. Funny, because my old friend Tom Grayson, CEO of Grayson Realty, Victor's boss, was raised by his mom alone. You just insulted him. I'm sure he'll love hearing about it. The color drained from Victor's face. Oakley's smirk shattered. Whispers spread like wildfire. Phones lifted to record. The Caldwells' arrogance crumbled in real time. My heart swelled with pride for my dad, but at the same time, it broke. Because when I turned to Micah, hoping, praying he would finally stand beside me, his eyes stayed fixed on the floor. His silence screamed louder than Oakley's insults, louder than Victor's mockery. It was in that moment, standing in a hall full of gasps and flashing cameras, that I realized the truth. Micah would never stand up for me. Not now, not ever. And for the first time since I said yes under the park lights, I felt free.
The reception hall buzzed with the sound of whispers and recording phones. What had begun as a celebration now felt like a trial. Every guest a witness. Every laugh, a knife. Oakley and Victor swayed unsteadily, their authority cracking under the weight of my father's words. Victor stumbled closer, voice low and panicked. "Please, don't tell Tom," he muttered, grabbing at my dad's arm like a drowning man clutching driftwood. "I didn't mean it like that. It was a joke." Oakley clutched her pearls, eyes darting nervously around at the crowd. "We were just teasing," she stammered. But the words fell flat. No one was buying it. I looked at Micah, my husband, my partner, or so I thought. He stood off to the side, hands shoved deep in his pockets, shoulders hunched, as though he could hide inside himself. He hadn't defended me. He hadn't defended my dad. He hadn't even defended us. The weight of that realization nearly buckled my knees. The humiliation from his parents had cut deep. But Micah's silence carved the deepest wound of all. I had trusted him to be my shield, my voice when I was under attack. Instead, he had chosen cowardice, and that cowardice was louder than all the Caldwells' cruelty combined. My dad's hand steadied me, his strength a lifeline, but I knew this moment wasn't his to fight. It was mine. I took the microphone, my hands shaking, but my voice steady. The room hushed instantly, every eye on me. "Thank you all for coming tonight." I began scanning the crowd, my gaze hardening as it fell on Oakley and Victor. "But there won't be a marriage today. Not like this. Not with people who think respect is optional and cruelty is tradition." Gasps rippled through the crowd, followed by murmurs. Oakley's face drained of color, Victor's jaw dropped, and Regan's smirk faltered for the first time. I turned to Micah, my throat tight, but my words clear. "I wanted forever with you, but forever means standing by each other, and you didn't. Not tonight, not when it mattered."
His face paled. His lips parted, but no words came, only silence. The hall erupted, some gasping, some clapping, others whispering furiously. But I didn't care. For the first time all night, I felt weight lifting from my chest. I handed the microphone back to the MC, grabbed my dad's hand, and walked toward the exit. The lace of my gown trailed behind me like the ghost of the life I had almost chosen. The cool Atlanta night air hit me like freedom. My dad pulled me into his arms. "I'm proud of you, Jenna," he whispered, voice thick with emotion. Tears spilled down my cheeks, but they weren't just grief, they were release. The next morning, the story had already spread. Guests had recorded the entire ordeal, uploading clips to social media. By noon, Caldwell wedding disaster trended locally, then regionally. Videos of Oakley demanding my salary and Victor mocking my dress flooded feeds, accompanied by captions like "Buckhead bullies exposed" and "Bride says nope." The support was overwhelming. Text, calls, and messages poured in. Friends told me I had dodged a bullet. Coworkers whispered admiration in the office. Strangers online called my dad a hero, applauded me for walking out. For the Caldwells, the fallout was brutal. Victor's humiliation spread quickly in business circles. My dad had kept his promise. He called Tom Grayson, Victor's boss, who was furious at hearing his family insulted single parents. Within weeks, Victor was demoted to a dead-end position in a rural office, stripped of his Buckhead swagger. Oakley's reputation crumbled in her social circles. Country club friends turned their backs after seeing the viral footage. Charity committees quietly stopped inviting her. Reagan's colleagues teased her in hushed tones at the courthouse, whispers about her optics biting harder than she ever imagined. And Micah? His silence followed him like a shadow. His coworkers, who had been guests at the wedding, carried the story back to the office. The man who couldn't stand up for his bride. Whispers grew louder until his embarrassment forced him to quit. I didn't hear from him directly for weeks. When he finally texted, the message was short. "I'm sorry. I didn't know what to do." I stared at it, my heart heavy but resolved. You did know what to do, I thought. You just didn't do it. I never responded. In the days that followed, I leaned on my dad more than ever. We spent evenings grilling in the backyard, talking about life and loss, love and strength. For the first time in years, I felt light. Not because life was perfect, but because I had chosen myself. The trap had been set by the Caldwells, but I hadn't stepped into it. I had walked away, and in doing so, I discovered something Micah and his family never understood. Dignity is worth more than diamonds, and silence is its own betrayal. That night at the reception, I had lost a husband, but I had found my voice. And that voice would carry me farther than their approval ever could. The days after the wedding felt surreal, as if I'd been dropped into someone else's life. One moment, I was a bride walking down an aisle toward forever. The next, I was a woman who had walked away from a husband before the ink on the vows had even dried. Atlanta didn't pause for me. The city kept humming, traffic roaring down Peachtree, streetlights flickering on as though nothing had changed. But inside me, everything had. At first, there was grief, not just for Micah, but for the dream I had carried, the picture of family I thought I was building. I had clung to it so tightly, convinced that love could conquer silence. Letting it go felt like mourning another death. I cried in the shower, cried in the car, cried until there was nothing left but an ache. But alongside grief came something else. Relief. Heavy, liberating, undeniable relief. I no longer had to brace myself for Oakley's sharp words, for Victor's disdain, for Reagan's smug lectures. I no longer had to twist myself into knots waiting for Micah to choose me over them. The storm had come, and I had walked out of it alive. Support poured in from places I didn't expect. Friends called, their voices warm with pride. "You did the right thing, Jenna. You're stronger than most." Coworkers who had sat in the back rows at the wedding stopped by my desk with quiet smiles. "You dodged a bullet." Even strangers online reached out sharing their own stories of toxic in-laws, broken engagements, betrayals that nearly crushed them.
Their words wrapped around me like armor. You're not alone. You're brave. But no support meant more than my dad's. He didn't lecture, he didn't gloat, he just showed up. He grilled steaks in the backyard, made his famous pancakes on Sunday mornings, sat with me on the porch when the nights felt too heavy. Sometimes we talked about mom, about resilience, about how silence can be the cruelest wound. Other times, we didn't say anything at all. Just sitting side by side, hearing the cicadas hum was enough. One evening, as the sun sank low and painted the porch in gold, he turned to me. "Jenna," he said softly, "you're stronger than you think. You didn't just survive that mess. You chose yourself. That's rare. And it's something your mom would have been proud of." Tears welled in my eyes, but this time they weren't just grief. They were gratitude. My dad had carried me when I was 8, when the world had collapsed. Now, at 29, he reminded me I could carry myself. The wedding fallout spread quickly beyond my circle. News of Oakley and Victor's drunken cruelty, captured on dozens of smartphones, continued to circulate. Clips of my dad standing up to them went viral. Strangers calling him Father of the Year. The Caldwells became a cautionary tale, their once pristine image unraveling thread by thread. Micah reached out once more, a text. "Can we talk?" I stared at the screen for a long time, my chest tight. Part of me wanted to hear him out, to believe he could explain his silence. But another part, the louder part, knew the truth. His silence didn't need explanation. Silence was a choice, and he had made. I didn't respond. Instead, I poured my energy into something new. My dad's logistics business, the one he had built with sweat and sacrifice, was at a crossroads. Some contracts had lapsed, and he was stretched thin trying to juggle operations and growth. One evening, as we ate on the porch, he looked at me with cautious hope. "What would you think," he asked, "about coming on board with me, helping me run things, maybe even take it over one day?" My fork paused halfway to my mouth. The idea had never crossed my mind. My life had been marketing, campaigns, corporate offices, but the thought of working alongside him, of building something real, something ours, lit a spark in me. "I'll do it," I said, my voice steady. His smile was the kind that reached his eyes, the kind that crinkled the lines carved by years of worry. "You already make me proud, kid, but this could be something special." The following weeks were a blur of contracts, client meetings, and learning the rhythm of the trucking world. It was nothing like marketing campaigns or social media launches. It was messier, grittier, but in a way more honest. And every late night at the office, every small win, it all reminded me of Mom's words my dad used to repeat: "Live, be happy." Slowly, I began to feel like I was doing both. The pain of the wedding didn't disappear overnight. Some mornings, I still woke up with the sting of betrayal sharp in my chest. But with each passing day, the sting dulled, replaced by something stronger: resolve. I wasn't just the girl who had walked away from a toxic marriage before it began. I was the woman who had chosen dignity over comfort, strength over silence. And as I sat at my dad's desk late one night, papers spread around me, the city lights twinkling through the blinds, I realized something profound. I hadn't lost my future at that wedding. I had found it. The first Monday morning I walked into my dad's logistics office felt like stepping into another world. Gone were the sleek glass towers and polished corporate halls of marketing agencies. Instead, I was greeted by the smell of burnt coffee, stacks of delivery logs, the hum of fax machines, and a team of drivers with grease on their hands and stories on their tongues. It was messy, loud, imperfect, and for the first time in months, it felt real. "Ready to get your hands dirty?" my dad asked with a grin as he handed me a stack of contracts. I was more than ready. The learning curve was steep. Logistics wasn't about flashy campaigns or clever slogans. It was about people, timing, and grit. Trucks had to run, clients had to be kept happy, and every late delivery was more than an inconvenience. It was a ripple of lost trust. I spent long nights hunched over spreadsheets, chasing down shipments, and calling clients to rebuild relationships that had slipped through the cracks. At first, some of the old-timers looked at me with skepticism. I was the boss's daughter, a marketing girl in heels trying to play business owner. But I didn't flinch. I sat with dispatchers, rode along on early morning routes, learned how to track freight in real time, even got my hands dirty changing a flat on a company truck. Slowly, their doubt shifted to respect. The business began to grow again. Little by little, new contracts came in, old clients returned, and with every success, my dad's smile grew wider, the deep worry lines on his face easing just a little. One evening, as we closed the office, he paused at the door and looked at me. "You know," he said, "I started this company to give us a life. But watching you take it further, that's the real legacy." My throat tightened. I thought of my mom, of the dreams she must have carried before cancer stole her time. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was honoring both of them. Meanwhile, the Caldwells were learning what it meant to live with consequences. Victor's demotion hit like a hammer. From corner office views in Buckhead to a cubicle in a rural branch, his fall from grace was both swift and public. My dad's call to Tom Grayson had sealed it. And in business circles, word spread quickly. Victor Caldwell wasn't untouchable anymore. Oakley's social world collapsed just as brutally. The viral videos of her drunken speech at my wedding made her the talk of Atlanta's elite, and not in the way she liked. Invitations to galas dried up. Charity committees dropped her quietly. Her name whispered like a cautionary tale of arrogance gone too far. Reagan tried to rise above the scandal, throwing herself into her work as a lawyer, but even she couldn't escape the whispers in courthouse hallways. The smirks of colleagues who'd seen the footage. Optics, she had lectured me once. Now optics were tearing her image apart. And Micah? His silence at the wedding became his defining story. In every room he entered, he was the groom who stood there, the man who let his bride be humiliated without lifting a word. At his tech firm, the whispers grew so relentless, he finally quit, too ashamed to stay. Friends who once praised him now avoided his gaze. He texted me a few more times, apologies, half-formed explanations, but I never answered.
I didn't hate him. Not anymore. I pitied him because the truth was, he hadn't just lost me. He'd lost himself in his silence. While they unraveled, I rebuilt. Sundays became sacred again, grilling with Dad, walking through farmers markets, even visiting Mom's grave together. I told her everything. About the wedding, about the strength I'd found, about how Dad and I were running the company side by side. It felt like she was listening, her presence warm in the breeze that rustled the trees. For the first time since she passed, I didn't feel like I was carrying grief alone. One night, after landing a big new contract, I sat in my office long after the building emptied. The city lights flickered through the blinds, the hum of trucks idling outside filling the quiet. I leaned back in my chair, exhaustion tugging at me, but a smile stretching across my face. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building. I was proving, to myself, to the world, that I was enough. More than enough. I thought about the girl who once guarded her heart like a fortress, who believed safety meant hiding from risk. That girl had been ready to compromise everything just to belong in a world that mocked her roots. Now I understood something deeper. I didn't need to belong to the Caldwells world. I was building my own. And it was stronger, freer, and more honest than anything they could ever control. The trap they had set at my wedding had snapped shut. But not on me, on them.
Life has a way of breaking you open, but sometimes, in the wreckage, you discover the parts of yourself you were always meant to find. Months passed after the wedding that wasn't, and each day carried me a little further from the sting of humiliation and closer to something stronger. Peace. The ache that once kept me awake at night began to soften, replaced by a steadiness I didn't know I was capable of. The logistics company grew under my hands, and in time, so did I. Clients began asking for me by name. Contracts bore my signature. Decisions carried my voice. Where once I had been Jenna, the marketing coordinator, I was now Jenna, the one who runs the Caldwell-free company that actually delivers. I smiled every time I caught myself saying, my company. My dad watched with pride, his eyes shining in a way that filled me with both joy and sorrow. Joy because he was there to see me rise. Sorrow because I knew my mom should have been here too. But grief no longer hollowed me out.
It guided me. Her absence had taught me resilience, and her memory gave me purpose. On quiet evenings, my dad and I sat on the porch, just like we used to when I was little. Sometimes we talked about business, sometimes about mom, sometimes about nothing at all. One evening, as fireflies blinked in the yard, he turned to me. "You know, Jenna," he said softly, "I used to worry you'd carry my struggles like weights, that being raised by me alone would make life harder for you. But you've turned every weight into strength. You didn't just survive, you built something better. That's not just making me proud, that's making your mom proud too." Tears pricked my eyes, but they were warm, not bitter. For the first time in years, I believed him. Meanwhile, the Caldwells faded into the background of Atlanta society. Their once pristine image was tarnished beyond repair. Victor remained stuck in his demoted position, stripped of influence. Oakley became a cautionary tale whispered at luncheons. Don't pull an Oakley. Reagan kept her job, but the smugness in her courtroom stride had dulled. And Micah, I never saw him again. Occasionally, his name surfaced in conversation, usually followed by sighs or headshakes. The man who stood silent, the groom who lost everything because he didn't speak when it mattered most. I didn't hate him anymore. I didn't even pity him. I simply let him go, like a stone I no longer needed to carry. Because the truth was, my story wasn't about him. It wasn't even about his family. It was about me, about a girl who had once believed love was too risky, who let herself believe again, and who discovered that the greatest love of all is the one you give yourself when you refuse to settle. The city moved on, but I carried my lessons with me like armor. That year, I took my dad on vacation. Not to roadside diners or truck stops, but to the beach, where we walked along the shore with the waves chasing our feet. I watched him laugh like I hadn't seen in years, his shoulders lighter, his heart free. And I realized something simple but profound. The life I wanted wasn't about chandeliers or Buckhead mansions. It was about freedom, dignity, and choosing the people who choose you back. Standing on that shore, the wind whipping my hair, the ocean stretching endlessly, I whispered a promise to myself. I will never again let anyone make me small. I will never again mistake silence for love. The wedding I walked away from could have trapped me in a gilded cage. Instead, it set me free. And freedom, I discovered, is the most beautiful beginning of all. In the end, I realized the wedding wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of my freedom. Sometimes heartbreak is just the universe clearing the way for your real future. I didn't walk away broken. I walked away stronger. If my story made you feel something, drop a comment below and share your thoughts. And remember, never settle for less than the respect and love you deserve. Until next time, stay strong and stay true to yourself.